The evening air had begun to cool as the group gathered along the road outside Jerusalem. The city lay ahead, crowded with pilgrims and tension. Torches flickered along the walls. Somewhere inside, decisions were already forming. Among the men walking together was one whose name would later become synonymous with betrayal. Yet at this moment, Judas Iscariot walked as he always had. He carried the same dust on his sandals. He shared the same meals. He had been present from early days, long before the outcome was known. This raises a question that has troubled readers for centuries. Why was Judas Iscariot chosen as a disciple at all? If betrayal would come, why was it allowed into the circle? Why was it remembered so clearly? Why did early Christian memory preserve Judas rather than remove him from the story or soften his role? The answer does not lie in a single explanation. It emerges from the way early Christians remembered their origins, from the narrative structure of the Gospels, and from the way questions of choice and responsibility were understood in the ancient world. Judas was not an accidental detail. He became part of the story because the story itself required the presence of betrayal to explain what followed. In the earliest layers of Christian memory, the disciples are not presented as ideal figures. They misunderstand, they argue, they flee. Judas stands as the most extreme example of a pattern already present. The narrative does not attempt to protect the reputation of the group. Instead, it exposes weakness. This openness suggests that early Christians did not construct their memories to make themselves look good. They preserved elements that were uncomfortable, even damaging, because they believed those elements mattered. Judas appears early in the lists of disciples. His role is not hidden or delayed. He is named alongside the others, chosen at the same time, entrusted with responsibility, and included in shared ministry. This matters. In ancient biography, negative figures were often introduced only when necessary. Judas is present from the beginning, which suggests that his later actions were understood as part of a longer story, not as a sudden intrusion. The name Iscariot likely identifies Judas by place or association, marking him as distinct from the others, most of whom came from Galilee. This difference may have mattered socially. He may have had different expectations, political hopes, or interpretations of what the movement should become. Ancient movements often attracted followers with varied motivations. Some sought renewal, some sought reform. Some hoped for decisive action against oppressive systems. The Gospels do not specify Judas's internal reasoning. They present only his actions and their consequences. This silence is significant. The narratives do not offer a psychological profile. They do not explain Judas away. They resist reducing his choice to a simple category. Instead, they place his decision within a broader pattern of misunderstanding and tension. Judas becomes the point at which hidden conflict becomes visible. The choice of Judas raises questions about foreknowledge and freedom. Early Christian writers lived in a world where divine knowledge and human responsibility were not seen as opposites. Events could be foreseen without being coerced. Individuals were held accountable for choices even within larger plans. This framework shaped how Judas was remembered. His betrayal was seen as real and voluntary, not as forced compliance. Some later interpretations attempted to explain Judas as necessary but tragic. Others emphasized his guilt. Still others tried to recover his image or speculate about alternative motives. Yet the earliest narratives maintain restraint. They do not justify him. They do not erase him. They allow his action to stand without excessive explanation. Why would early Christians preserve such a figure at all? One answer lies in credibility. A movement inventing its origins would likely remove a betrayer from its founding group. Including Judas made the story more difficult, not easier. It acknowledged that proximity to truth does not guarantee loyalty. It warned later generations against assuming that participation ensures understanding. Another reason lies in narrative necessity. Betrayal provides the internal mechanism that leads to arrest without public uprising. The authorities do not seize Jesus openly during daylight. They act quietly at night, guided by someone who knows the group's movements. Judas's role explains how this could occur. Without him, the story becomes less plausible. Early Christians, committed to preserving what they believed had happened, retained Judas because removing him would leave gaps. Judas also serves as a mirror. The other disciples abandon Jesus as well. They flee, they deny. Judas's act is different in degree, not in category. This distinction matters. The story does not isolate guilt in one individual to absolve the rest. It shows a spectrum of failure. Judas stands at one end, but the line runs through them all. In this sense, Judas is not an anomaly. He is the clearest expression of a tension present from the beginning. The disciples struggle to understand the nature of the mission. They expect honor, they argue over status, they resist ideas of suffering. Judas's decision emerges from this environment, not outside it. The Gospels present Judas as entrusted with the group's funds. This detail implies trust. It also implies responsibility. His later actions are framed as a breach of that trust. Ancient audiences would have understood the gravity of such betrayal. Loyalty within a teacher-disciple relationship carried moral weight. Breaking it was not merely personal, but communal. Early Christian memory also preserves Judas to make a theological point without explicitly arguing it. The presence of betrayal demonstrates that the movement did not advance through ideal conditions. It emerged through failure, fear, and loss. This shaped how early Christians understood their own struggles. If betrayal could exist at the center, then weakness at the margins did not disqualify them. The question of why Judas was chosen also intersects with how leadership was understood. Teachers in the ancient world did not select followers based on guaranteed outcomes. They gathered students who responded at the moment. Judas responded. Whatever later unfolded did not negate the reality of that initial response. The choice reflects a moment in time, not a prediction of the future. Some scholars argue that Judas represents a literary figure shaped to embody rejection. Others maintain that his memory reflects a historical individual whose actions were too widely known to erase. Both views agree on one point. His presence in the story served a purpose beyond blame. It anchored the narrative in realism and tension. The aftermath of Judas's decision deepens this complexity. The Gospels portray regret, despair, and isolation. They do not frame his end as triumph or escape. They present it as tragic. This portrayal avoids simple moral resolution. It leaves readers with discomfort rather than clarity. That discomfort may be intentional. Early Christian communities wrestling with persecution, internal conflict, and doubt could see in Judas a warning without finding comfort in condemnation. Betrayal did not surprise the movement's founders. It had been there from the beginning. Yet the story continued. Why was betrayal woven into the story rather than explained away? Because explaining it away would weaken the narrative's honesty. Early Christians did not sanitize their origins. They preserved a story where one of their own made a catastrophic choice. They did so because they believed the truth included failure. Judas also functions as a boundary figure. He marks the point where misunderstanding becomes opposition. Other disciples misunderstand but remain. Judas crosses a line. The narrative uses this distinction to explore responsibility. Not all failure is the same. Some actions carry consequences that cannot be undone. In ancient storytelling, characters often embodied questions rather than answers. Judas embodies the question of how someone can be close and yet turn away. The story does not resolve this question. It leaves it open, allowing each generation to confront it anew. The fact that Judas was chosen suggests that the movement did not operate on certainty. It involved risk. Trust was extended without guarantee. This reflects a broader theme in the Gospels. Invitations are real. Responses matter. Outcomes are not predetermined in human experience, even if they are later interpreted within a larger framework. Early Christian theology did not develop in abstraction. It emerged from memory. Judas's presence shaped that memory. It forced communities to grapple with the reality that betrayal can come from within, not only from outside forces. This awareness influenced how communities structured leadership, accountability, and trust. Judas is also remembered because removing him would shift blame outward. Without Judas, responsibility would fall entirely on external authorities. Including him complicates the story. It acknowledges internal failure alongside external pressure. This balance lends the narrative weight. The question of free will arises naturally. Judas is not depicted as compelled. He makes arrangements. He acts deliberately. The narratives assign him responsibility even while acknowledging larger patterns at work. This reflects ancient views of moral agency. Individuals act within circumstances but are accountable for choices. Later debates about predestination and necessity grew far beyond the original narratives. The Gospels themselves remain restrained. They do not philosophize. They tell what happened as they remembered it. Judas was chosen. Judas betrayed. Both statements are held together without resolution. The inclusion of Judas also shaped how early Christians understood forgiveness and its limits. Peter denies and returns. Judas betrays and does not. The contrast invites reflection without explicit commentary. It suggests that restoration depends not only on failure but on response afterward. In preserving Judas, early Christians preserved a warning. Being chosen does not eliminate responsibility. Being close does not ensure fidelity. Participation does not replace understanding. These lessons were essential for a movement spreading rapidly among diverse communities. The story of Judas resists simplification. He is neither a mere villain nor a misunderstood hero. He is a figure placed within the narrative to reveal the cost of choice. His presence reminds readers that the path from calling to outcome is not guaranteed. Why was Judas chosen as a disciple at all? Because at the moment of choosing, he stood among those willing to follow. Because the movement did not operate with foreknowledge in human terms. Because the story required honesty about its origins. Because betrayal, like faithfulness, is part of the human response to meaning. The early Christians did not remove Judas because doing so would have rewritten their past. They chose instead to remember him. In doing so, they preserved a story that acknowledged risk, failure, and consequence. The presence of Judas does not weaken the narrative, it grounds it. In the final scene, Judas leaves the table quietly. The others remain unaware. The story moves forward, shaped by choices already made. Betrayal does not end the movement, it becomes part of its memory. And in that memory, Judas remains not as an error to be erased, but as a question that continues to ask why being chosen does not guarantee staying faithful. The story leaves that question open. That may be its most honest feature.